Live. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Dorset Council's Northern Area Planning Committee on Thursday, the 24th of August, on this really glorious sunny day, which we're going to be spending in front of the cameras on your behalf. I'm Councillor Sherry Jesperson, and I'm chair of this committee. This meeting is being live streamed, and a copy of the recording will be available on the Dorset Council website. First, can we take an alphabetical roll call of those members present? When I call your name, indicate that you're here, and then mute yourself. So, John Andrews, we have apologies for. Tim Cook.
Morning, Chairman, present.
Les Fry.
Good morning, present.
Matt Hall.
Good morning, present.
Brian Heatley.
Good morning, present.
Carol Jones.
Present, thank you.
Stella Jones.
Present.
Emma Parker, we have apologies. Mary Penfold.
Good morning, everyone, present.
Val Pothecary.
Good morning, present.
And Belinda Rideout.
Good morning, Chairman, present.
Lovely, thank you very much. We've also got a number of Dorset Council officers with us today. I will just read out who they are, and they will introduce themselves when they speak. Mike Garrity is Head of Planning, Hannah Smith, Planning Area Manager, Simon McFarlane, Planning Area Lead Gillingham, Hugh Williams, Planning Lead Projects Officer, Steve Savage, Highways Transport Development Manager, Mark Hitchcock, Acting Enforcement Manager, Phil Crowther is our solicitor, Nicola Holsworth will be reading the public representations to us today. Elaine Tibble is our Democratic Services Officer today, and Pauline Well and Lillian Broad are producing the meeting. So welcome to you all, and welcome to those members of the public and the media who might be listening in. Now, we've got a full day's agenda today, so we will break for lunch on completion of agenda item 6B, and we will reconvene at 2 o'clock to consider item 5B, and we will reconvene at 2 o'clock to consider item 5C, Bourton Mill. So people who are listening who want to follow the Bourton Mill planning application, that will be on at 2 o'clock promptly. It's depending on how the timing goes, we might take agenda item 6 before lunch, but we'll see how that goes. We will also pause for a short break during the session if we need to, a short comfort break. Good. So now a word about the procedures for the benefit of the people viewing the meeting. For each application, I will invite the case officer to present their report and recommendations, followed by presentations from other officers. Members of the public have been invited to submit written representations to a maximum of 450 words, and these submissions have all been read by the officers and by members of the committee. Now, up to 3 submissions in support and 3 against may be read aloud to the committee. The ward member may address the meeting, and finally the applicant's submission is heard. The parish and the town or parish council will speak before the ward member. Following these representations, members can ask questions on points of clarification, and when that's all done, the committee will then deliberate and come to a view. Now, voting procedures are a little different than heretofore, so I will read this paragraph so that I get the legal position stated clearly. In consultation with group leaders, the Chief Executive has exercised his delegated powers to revert to virtual informal meetings of council committees until September. This decision was made in the light of the increasing COVID-19 case rates and the projected increase for August into September. It will be reviewed in September. For today's meeting, this means that when a decision is required, committee members will express a minded to decision in respect of the recommendations set out in the officer's report. The decision will then be taken under officer's delegated authority in the light of the minded to decision. Once the committee has voted, I will turn to Mike Garrity, Head of Planning, who will make his decision. And should his decision differ from the minded to expressed by the committee, he will give his reasons. So I hope that's clear. It all comes out good in the end, I assure you. So moving on then to our agenda for today, item 1, apologies. Could we formally record the apologies, please, Elaine?
Yes, we can. We have 2 apologies from councillors John Andrews and Emma Parker.
Lovely, thank you very much. Members, do any of you wish to declare an interest in any of the items before us? I'm seeing nothing. As always, should anything occur to you during the course of the meeting, you can always let me know in the chat bar. Public participation, I've covered how that works. Item 4, urgent items. I'm happy to say there are none. So we can move on now to our planning applications, agenda item 5. And the first item then is agenda item 5A, an application for 80 dwellings on land north of Common Mead Lane in Gillingham. This is an outline application looking at access only today. Senior Planning Officer Simon McFarlane, would you like to begin your report, please, Simon?
Thank you for the introduction, Sherry. Yes, I'll just get my presentation up.
Thank you. That's lovely, we can see it clearly.
Okay, good. I will begin. Good morning, councillors, members of the public. Yeah, this is the application for outline application to determine access only by the erection of up to 80 dwellings, vehicular access, associated open space and infrastructure at land northeast of the Mellows Nursing Home, Common Mead Lane in Gillingham. So just starting with the wider site context, which I'll just take a moment on, we can see here the site outlined in red at the western edge of the main town of Gillingham. Just to the north of the site, outlined in blue, indicates land that is owned by the site owner. No development is proposed in the blue area. The application only focuses on the red line. It's worth noting at this point that Gillingham is the largest of the 4 main North Dorset towns, partly due to its relative lack of constraints and provision of services. It will be expected to host around 40% of the housing growth in North Dorset, which accounts to around about 2,200 dwellings over the planned period. So the site is located outside of the town's settlement boundary, but adjacent to it. It has no particular designations, and it's conveniently located within round about a kilometre's walking distance along these roads to the main town centre high street and its services, which is here. There's also a train station, which is the only major train station in any of the North Dorset towns. So overall, officers consider that this could be considered to be a sustainable location within good walking distance of public conveniences, public transport. The local convenience shops located just down the road, primary schools within walking distance. So subject to all the other technical matters, policy matters being addressed, this can be considered a very good location. This is just a close-up of the red line plan. You see here to the south of the site is a care home called the Mellows Care Home. To the west of the site is undeveloped land. To the north of the site is an undeveloped field, and then everything to the east, as you can see, is the housing estate. This is Freeing Way. So this is an aerial view of the site. You can see it's a green field. There's a strong boundary hedge and trees located around the north, the west and the southern boundary. There's a public footpath, the N6457, that runs through the centre of the site and exits here, and a footpath also that enters from Freem Way and exits at number 1. This is the care home to the edge of the site, and the site access is proposed from this point, number 5, onto Commonmead Lane. I'm just going to run through some photographs of the site. This is taken from Commonmead Lane. This is where the proposed site access would be, so this would involve the removal of this hedgerow here. This is the access to the care home. So top picture is slightly within the site, again looking to the west elevation of the care home, and then north into the site, just demonstrating that the site is currently sort of unfarmed. It's just a field laid to grass. The bottom picture is the eastern elevation with properties on Freem Way overlooking the site. Top picture further into the site here, looking south towards the southern boundary and the care home. And the site to the bottom of the slide is looking north. This is the northern boundary, and this is the western boundary. You can see heavily treed with trees and hedgerows. So top picture, this is the north elevation of the care home. You're slightly to the sort of the west edge of the site there. The bottom picture is then looking at the footpath that runs through the centre of the site, which exits in the corner over here. The top picture, this is the western boundary running along here, and then the northern boundary running along here. And bottom picture is, again, this is the northern boundary with views over to the conservation area and the listed White Brewery building to the north. The distance from the photograph to that brewery building is probably just over 500 metres. This is where the public footpath exits the site on the northern boundary. Happened to visit this site on a bit of a boggy winter's day. As part of the plans, should they proceed, there'll be public footway improvements to address these flooding issues at the entrances, and that will all be amended. So just getting onto site access, which is the only technical matter that really seeks approval along with the principal today. The access here is proposed off Commonmead Lane into the site. Transport consultees are satisfied that the requisite visibility displays can be achieved going west and east down Commonmead Lane. There was a query raised from a member of the public about the sort of rights of way, if you like, over the Mellows care home access. This plan on the bottom left indicates in the sort of lilac colour that land is in public highways ownership, and consultees are satisfied that the visibility display goes over public land. So in fact that visibility and access can be delivered all under the applicant's control. So just moving on now to the illustrative master plan. This is the illustrative master plan that was submitted with the application initially. This was for around up to 85 dwellings. Urban design consultees, landscape officers and myself had some concerns with this illustrative layout, bearing in mind that it is only illustrative, but it was considered that it was slightly too many houses. There was concern with regard to the sort of proximity of this perimeter layout road. Overall, it just felt that there was a slightly suburban feel to the proposed layout. There was some large areas of parking inside the site, and there's some connectivity issues. There's a lack of local play areas provided and local equipped play areas. So through negotiations with the applicant, they agreed to reduce the dwellings to up to 80, and this has resulted in a revised master plan, which you can see here. So this is now part of the consideration today. So this is a reduction to 80 dwellings, which results in a dwellings per hectare density of around about 21, which is considered to be relatively low, but still makes effective use of the site in the context of the area. Some of the issues have been addressed with regard to removing the perimeter road. So there's been a revised internal layout which provides better circulation. The properties just feel slightly better spaced with more ample room to reflect that sort of edge of settlement, more rural feel. There's been the incorporation of a LEAP, a local equipped area of play, to the northern boundary here, and also a local area of play on the southern sort of eastern boundary here. There'll be suds features for the drainage down here by the access, and also up here via an existing pond. All of the strong boundary hedgerows and trees will be retained. It's been confirmed that they're all within the red boundary and can be use of planning conditions. I should also say that the provision of affordable housing is policy compliant.
Can I just ask you to say that sentence again, because your sound disappeared for a minute? So can I just confirm that they're all in the ownership? Would you mind going back to that point, because your sound disappeared? Thank you. Yeah, sure, Sherry. Yes, they are all within the red line boundary and the ownership of the site. And then I was just going to confirm that the provision of affordable housing on the site would be 25%, which is policy compliant. So overall, we got to the stage where officers, landscape officers, urban design officers, were satisfied at this illustrative outline stage that up to 80 dwellings could be accommodated effectively on this site in this location. In the context of considering the residential amenity of local neighbours, it's acknowledged that the development of this site as a current greenfield site that's used for recreation and walking, that there will be a substantial change which will bring some impact to local neighbours in terms of its change of use, increase in noise and domestic activity generally. Overall, though, it's considered that this wouldn't be enough to warrant the refusal of the application. And then in terms of particular considerations in terms of distancing, there's just some indicative distances laid out here that can be achieved in future more detailed layouts. So we can see distances of over 22 metres and 33 metres, 25 metres back to back, a side distance here of 14 metres, which should be considered to be acceptable. So overall, it was considered that in future reserve matters applications, it would be entirely possible to protect the neighbouring amenity of local residents adjoining the site. So in terms of heritage, the site's located around about 200 metres at the closest point to the conservation area, and probably around about 500 metres to these listed buildings here. The conservation officer considers that there'd be no harm to any of the red dots, the listed buildings, just given their quite significant distance away from the sites and the lack of intervisibility between them. The conservation officer also considers that the site will unlikely form a prominent visual element which detracts from the character of the conservation area. However, it will encroach into its sort of hinterland undeveloped setting just by virtue of building in this area here. So
There will be some less than substantial harm to the significance. However, that harm, whilst to be given great weight, overall is considered to be minimal. And where harm exists, it must be outweighed by public benefits in order for the development to be acceptable. So in this case, officers considered that the delivery of 25% affordable housing, temporary construction jobs, provision of housing which is in significant need in North Dorset, provision of housing close to the town centre, would all outweigh that harm overall. And this small blue dot here is a non-designated heritage asset, which is a moated site at Thornbury, and overall it was considered again that there'd be some minor harm through the development within its setting, but overall that harm is considered to be acceptable in light of those benefits and overall judgment. And this plan indicates important open gaps that have been identified in the neighbourhood plan, because you have visually sensitive areas. So you can see the site here in the red circle, and just to the north around the sort of white brewery building is this sort of green squiggle, which is important to retain, and we can see that the site falls outside of that. So again, respecting that gap to that visually sensitive area and the conservation area. Given its location next to a moated site and the conservation area to the north, Council's senior archaeologist requested that the applicants carried out some trial evaluation trenching, which they did over the summer months. The excavation of all of these trenches that you see here resulted in some minor finds of fairly sort of low significance. So the Council's archaeologist is satisfied on that basis, and further works will be secured by planning condition. So this slide illustrates the list of infrastructure and planning obligations that have been negotiated and agreed with the applicant. It's a fairly substantial list. The delay to the previous planning application has allowed the legal agreement to be progressed and is currently in draft form and is able to progress, of course, if the application is approved. I won't read through them all, but I'll just make the point that in terms of the green infrastructure, there's some pretty significant contributions towards destination play facilities, formal outdoor sports and its maintenance, and also informal outdoor sports and space maintenance. And some of those specific schemes are located obviously within Gillingham. They will include contributions towards Hardings Park, provision towards tennis courts, five-a-side football pitches, and Riversmeet Community Centre and its facilities. And there's also contributions towards the area at Rollsbridge Public Open Space, improvements to pathways, and possibly a focal footbridge over the River Stour. Other significant contributions, obviously, we've just discussed the 25% affordable housing, libraries, household, primary, secondary and preschool education, and contributions towards the National Health Service. So we're confident that the development will mitigate its impacts and meet the tests in the Community Infrastructure Levy regulations. Now, as this site is outside of the settlement boundary, I just thought I'd spend a moment to go through the spatial strategy and some of its important policies in this case, and then touch on the neighbourhood plan policy, which is relevant, and then also national policy. So on this slide, I'm going to start from the bottom up. So policy 20, the countryside, restricts development that's located within the countryside, and officially this site being outside of the settlement boundary is within the countryside, where normally development would be restricted to a certain set of uses, for example rural exception sites or development where there's an overriding need for it to be located in the countryside. So the provision of market housing in this location does provide some conflict with this policy. There's also some conflict with the Policy 2 core spatial strategy, which also indicates that development should be within settlement boundaries, again, which this development is not. However, this is where we get down to a sort of slightly nuanced position in that Policy 2, the core strategy, does direct development to the 4 main towns, and this site is within close proximity to the main town of Gillingham, in what officers consider to be a relatively and very sustainable location. And on the basis that the local authority can't currently demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, the council follows the same provisions that are in the National Planning Policy Framework set out under Policy 1, which is the presumption in favour of sustainable development, which says, in the case of not having a 5-year housing land supply, that the test will be that permission should be granted unless there are any adverse impacts of granting that permission, which would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. And I'll just move on to that balance slightly later in the presentation. Now, in terms of the Gillingham neighbourhood plan, there is a policy which identifies the site. The site's located here, marked C, which is this pink area, which is an area of search. So Policy 22 references protecting important green spaces and states that the areas of search identified for new outdoor sports provision and areas identified for additional informal recreation, allotments, cemetery provision should be safeguarded from alternative development that would prejudice their delivery unless there is a clear overriding public benefit to the proposed development that cannot reasonably be located outside of that area. So again, there's some conflict with this policy. However, again, in the context of the presumption in favour of sustainable development, that this policy is afforded less weight, and also since the adoption of the neighbourhood plan, there doesn't appear to have been any movement or any progress towards finding a partner or a developer that's willing to come forward to provide sports provision on this site. So overall, with also the provision set out in the legal agreement for contributions towards sports provision within the town, officers consider that this conflict can be sort of outweighed by the benefits and the provision of housing. Just touching on the emerging planning policy, this is an extract from the local plan, which has just undergone its first round of public consultation. So it should be noted at this stage that this plan and this emerging policy is to be given very limited weight at this early stage. But the site is referenced here in the bottom left-hand corner in orange as a potential allocation for residential development, and there's a policy GIL 3, land at Commonmead Lane, which states that the land is allocated for residential-led development, should be accessed from Commonmead Lane, and lists a range of points which the development would meet if that policy was adopted. But again, limited weight can be given to this policy, but it does indicate a direction of travel. Planning policy officers have assessed a range of sites around the town, that there's an acknowledged need to find more housing land for delivery. This site here is an optional urban extension. However, I think it was felt that they didn't want to allocate something so large as to potentially conflict with the delivery of the southern extension, which is located down here. So just in terms of housing delivery, as I've mentioned, the local authority currently only has a 3.3 years housing land supply, which triggers the presumption in favour. And then just some figures to demonstrate the need at the moment. So for the first 9 years of the plan, only 87 dwellings were delivered in Gillingham against a target of 2,200. Since 2011, only 15 affordable dwellings have been delivered in Gillingham. And even with the delivery of the Gillingham Southern Extension, which will provide about 1,800 dwellings eventually, more housing is required to meet this growing demand. And why in this case, despite the site's location outside of the settlement boundary, the weight to be given to the provision of housing in this case is quite significant. So just now touching on the presumption, this is the extract policy 11 of the Mppf, and the key bit is for decision making point D, point 2, states that any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in the framework taken as a whole. And officers consider that there are no adverse impacts in those following areas: the location, relatively well located, close to town. The density and layout has been negotiated and is considered to be acceptable at this illustrative outline stage. There's no technical objections remaining on landscape impact. The site's not in a AONB or national designation. Heritage harm is fairly minimal on the lower end of the less than substantial scale and can be outweighed by public benefits. The requisite ecology surveys have all been completed, and further mitigation will be secured by condition for a wide variety of species. The archaeology has been completed in terms of the trial trenching, and the archaeologist at the council is satisfied. There's no objections in terms of flooding or transport, and officers consider that the residential amenity of neighbouring residents, although impacted, will be protected enough to warrant the approval of the application. And there's Section 106 obligations agreed in principle to mitigate the development's impacts. So just starting to sort of wrap this up and provide my conclusion. In summary, the site is contrary to the spatial strategy, local plan and the neighbourhood plan by virtue of being outside of the settlement boundary. However, the North Dorset Local Plan Policy 1 follows the Mppf presumption in favour of sustainable development. Council cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, and therefore Policy 1 and paragraph 11 of the Mppf are engaged. The neighbourhood plan policies are more than 2 years old, and the plan does not allocate housing. Therefore, the policies are not afforded the additional protection by virtue of paragraph 14 of the Mppf. Nevertheless, they still hold significant weight. Therefore, the tilted balance towards housing should be applied, and the application should only be refused if the adverse impacts would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. And in this case, the officers and all of the statutory constituencies have raised no objections. The public benefits of housing delivery here, affordable housing provision, short-term construction jobs should be given significant weight in this case and would outweigh any less than substantial harm to heritage assets. This is a good opportunity to locate housing in a very sustainable location with few constraints and within walking distance of the largest major town in the North Dorset area identified for strategic growth in the local plan. And so in conclusion, the recommendation is therefore to grant planning permission subject to Section 106 and conditions. And I just note on the conditions, the applicant has agreed under condition 2, I think, to have a lower time period than would normally be sought, with reserve matters being submitted within 2 years rather than 3 years to assist with its speed and delivery. And on that note, Sherry, I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. That was a very clear and thorough report. It's excellent work. Thank you very much indeed. I think the committee members will now feel very well informed. So thank you for that. Could I ask Steve Savage, the Senior Highways Officer, if you would like to add something to this report, please, Steve. Over to you.
Thank you, Sherry. Good morning, everyone. I'll just touch on a number of the highway aspects that Simon's already outlined for us. As you've heard, this is an outline application with all matters reserved except for the access to the development site. and the development will be accessed from Common Mead Lane, which is classified the C108. Simon, could you put up the slide just showing the access, please? That's great. So that shows the new priority junction, which we formed just to the northeast of the existing access to the Mellows care home. And this is of sufficient size to allow the two-way movement of all vehicles, which has been confirmed by a full swept path analysis provided by the applicant. As you can see, the access will be provided with visibility displays. These measure 2.4 metres by 43 metres in both directions along the near side carriageway edge, and this complies with the guidance provided by Manual for Streets. These sight lines can be provided within land controlled by the applicant or over the adjacent public highway, which, as Simon intimated, is the lilac coloured land on the diagram to the bottom left of the screen. Now, sufficient intervisibility between the proposed access and the existing care home access to the southwest is available. This design aspect has been considered by a Stage 1 road safety audit, which was carried out by independent auditors and has been accepted by the Highway Authority. You'll see that there's a 2 metre wide footway connection provided on the eastern aspect of the proposed Bellmouth Junction, which connects to the existing footway that runs along the northern side of Common Mead Lane, which provides pedestrian connectivity to the town centre and its associated facilities. As you'd expect, the application is supported by a transport statement that considers the likely highway impact of up to 85 dwellings. I appreciate it's now been reduced to 80. A residential development of this size is predicted to generate up to 41 two-way vehicle trips in the AM peak hour, which is between 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock in the morning, and 38 two-way vehicle trips in the PM peak hour between 1700 and 1800. And these are two-way trips, so that's trips in and out of the development. I also asked the developer to look at the likely trip distribution of the development traffic in the peak periods, which indicated that 86% of vehicles were predicted to travel to and from the northeast, travelling along Common Mead Lane towards or from Broad Robin and the B3081 junction to the north. This obviously means that 14% of vehicles are anticipated to travel from the site to or from the southwest. So in the busiest period, the AM peak, this equates to 35 trips to or from the northeast and only 6 to or from the southwest. The accepted conclusion is that these trips will be likely to have a negligible impact on the local road network. So summing up, the Highway Authority considers that the residual cumulative impact of the development cannot be thought to be severe when consideration is given to paragraphs 110 and 111 of the National Planning Policy Framework, and has consequently recommended a conditional approval. Thank you, Chair. I'll take any questions as and when they arise.
That's lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Steve. Right, we have a number of public statements now, which we're going to hear. Dorset Council Officer Nicola Holdsworth is going to read those for us. Nicola, the floor is yours if you'd like to read out our statements from members of the public.
Hello. Hi, thank you. Okay, so I've got Councillor Graham Poulter, Gillingham Neighbourhood Plan, against the application. I make this submission an objection from the perspective of the Gillingham Neighbourhood Plan published in July 2018. The case officer's report has quite correctly brought the committee's attention to the provisions of policies 17, 19 and 22 of the Neighbourhood Plan. This application could not be more clearly in breach of those policies. Those policies represent the wishes, desires and aspirations of the community of Gillingham. The number of objections to this application without doubt reinforces and illustrates those wishes, desires and aspirations. The Mppf identifies 3 overarching objectives of the planning system: an economic objective, a social objective and environmental objective. The economic benefit identified by the case officer is a transient benefit. How will this development support growth, innovation or improved productivity? It will not. The social objective: since the making of the neighbourhood plan, there have been applications for over 2,000 dwellings with provision for further 200 at Station Road. There is the prospect of further windfall applications. Gillingham's housing needs are already catered for. A sufficient number and range of homes are already provided for. The removal of this land from the identified area of the neighbourhood plan for outdoor sport provision allotment clearly does not support the community's health, social or cultural well-being. The environmental objective. The plans refer to the northern field, which is to be retained. What guarantee is there that this will be the long-term case? Will this field be subject for future applications? There is a possibility that any net biodiversity gain would be short-lived. The provision of S106 monies cannot be considered in all cases to be an appropriate form of compensation for failing to provide for example, outdoor sports provision or allotments. Land has to be made available for such matters, not developed. If there is no land available in suitable and appropriate areas, then the S106 monies cannot be used to provide these facilities. There has been reference to the emerging Dorset local plan. With all due respect, this draft plan is in an early stage of its infancy that it should be totally disregarded. There has been much criticism of it, and in particular to that part of which identified this site for potential development. There is absolutely no guarantee that this particular provision will remain. The SHLA referred to is not, of course, binding and has identified the site as developable subject to policy change, which it has not. The SHLA should be therefore ignored. For the reasons mentioned, the application does not meet the sustainable objectives set out in the Mppf, and therefore the application should be rejected. Mr. M. Cridge. Section 29.5.6. What is meant by in order to fulfil the shorter term need? What happens to the dwellings at the end of this short term? The residents of the Mellows care home and residents of Frome Way, who overlook the proposed site would not agree that the site would have minimal adverse impact on surrounding landscape or the many people who use this green space. Section 29.56 continued. In the plan, the number of dwellings the number around 70 dwellings. In the letter dated 20/07/21, the number has increased to 80. Why the difference? Section 29.5.7. On the matter of vehicular access from Common Mead Lane, the owners of the Mellows care home, Bupa, have instructed their legal representative in a letter dated the 3rd of the 2nd, 21, marked for the attention of Jackie Witt, states they, Bupa, would not permit vehicular access across the land they own to the east of the care home. Section 29.5.8. There is no provision in the site's design to incorporate two existing rights of way crossing the site. The development would take away access to popular existing green spaces. Jill 3, land at Common Mead Lane, section II. Should the proposed access from Common Mead Lane not be permitted, reference 29.5.7, and there is no proposed alternative access, then this application should be denied on those grounds. Section IV. No formal public open space and play facilities are indicated on the site plan. Section V. No indication that the either allotments or sports pitches are indicated on the site plan. I understand that there are 130 responses to the application, 100 sent. Oh, hello.
Nicola.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can now. Could you go back to where to the paragraph that begins, I understand that there are 130. Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
You.
I understand that there are 130 responses to the application. 128 against, 2 for, and an indication of the feelings about this application. Why weren't all of the responders sent letters informing them of this meeting? I was only made aware of the initial meeting and format when a friend showed me their letter, and subsequently only found out about the change of format when I contacted George Dare. Had these instances not happened, I would not have been aware of the opportunity to air my views. How many letters were actually sent? Okay. This one's from Gillingham Town Council, Councillor Von Clements and Councillor Cullingford. Gillingham Town Council recommends refusal of the application for the following reasons. The site is served by a substandard rural lane. A section of the lane is of single carriageway width with no footways or usable highway verges, and pedestrians share the carriageway with all vehicles. The character and nature of Common Mead Lane presents conditions that are totally unsuitable to cater for the likely increase in vehicular and pedestrian traffic generated by the new development, and will adversely impact upon the safety of all existing highway users. Therefore, the application is considered unsuitable and contrary to the guidance set out in the Mppf, local planning policy, and the guidance provided by the Department for Transport publication, Inclusive Mobility, a guide to best practice on access to pedestrian and transport infrastructure. There is only one bus service a week from the nearest bus stop, and this does not go to the town centre. The reliance on private vehicles is not a sustainable option and contrary to the Mppf. The site is outside the settlement boundary in open countryside where the development should be strictly controlled. The development does not provide a sensitive transition between the urban and rural environment and will have a detrimental effect on the natural landscape area. The proposed development does not offer any biodiversity gains, nor does it protect or enhance the natural environment. The development of this area will be harmful to the setting of one of the most historically important areas in Gillingham, Queen's Farm, which is associated with the Gillingham Royal Forest. The development does not provide adequate green infrastructure to improve the quality of life for the residents. It is suggested that formal outdoor sports and informal outdoor space can be provided through the Section 106 funding. However, how can this be achieved when the land set aside in the neighbourhood plan for sports provision is proposed for development? There are no areas of land in Gillingham on which to provide such vital infrastructure. Many of the young people in Gillingham are being denied an opportunity to play football. This is unacceptable in a town of our size and is contrary to the Mppf, which supports healthy lifestyles through the provision of accessible green infrastructure and sports facilities for all ages. The Mppf states that the purpose of the planning system is to contribute to the achievement of sustainable development. The proposed development does not meet the 3 objectives of the Mppf, and the harm caused by the application significantly outweighs the benefits. Okay, and one more. Nicole Stacey, PCL Planning Agent. Good morning, Chair and members. I'm writing on behalf of the applicants and wish to endorse your officer's recommendation for approval for this outline application. The site is situated to the north of Common Mead Lane on the southwestern edge of Gillingham. Gillingham is recognised in the adopted North Dorset local plan as one of the 4 main towns that are considered for most sustainable locations for housing, and the site has been identified by the council as an allocation for residential development in the emerging Dorset local plan. The site is within close proximity to a range of services and facilities and is not subject to any landscape heritage or other designations. The application has been submitted in outline. The layout, scale, appearance and landscaping of the site are matters reserved for future consideration. The applicants have worked positively and proactively with officers and relevant consultees both prior to and during the course of the application to address queries raised and achieve a scheme which is supported by your officers. The proposal will provide a range of high quality homes, including a policy compliant level of affordable housing, 25%, to meet identified local needs and assist in the meeting of the council's housing land supply. The scheme will deliver a range of economic, environmental and social benefits through the creation and support of local jobs, biodiversity enhancement and provisions of areas of open space and play. A range of financial contributions would be provided to be spent on enhanced community infrastructure within the town, including healthcare, education, libraries, sports provision and local bus services. No adverse impacts have been identified which would outweigh the substantial benefits of the scheme. We therefore hope that you support the officer's recommendation and approve this outline application.
Thank you very much indeed, Nicola. Well read. That was quite loud there. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Before we move on to questions from members, could I just have for the record, really, just have some clarification on the point that was raised by Mr. Cridge in his representation about the letters of notification, the query over whether notification of letters around this agenda were sent to sufficient number of people. And of course, that just to cover that, that's the reason why this item was postponed from last month's meeting to this, to make sure that people had sufficient notification. I'm not sure if either the planning officer or the head of planning want to just very briefly make any comment on that.
Thank you, Sherry. Yeah, just very briefly. Yeah, you're quite correct. We postponed the meeting from the previous occasion because we had a technical issue with notifying the neighbours, which caused some problems. So we decided, in the interest of making sure everybody had the opportunity to be notified, that we'd hold those items back to this meeting. So therefore, all notification letters were sent out in accordance with our approach for this committee.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much. I think it's important that people listening to the meeting know that we do take that public representation very seriously. And if there's the slightest question, we will err on the side of the public, as it were, and that's what we did on this occasion. So in the event, the public were all notified and they have all had their opportunity to have their say. Good. Moving on to members' questions then. I've seen none in the chat bar yet, but I do have one to start with. Simon, I noticed in your photographs early on, there were a number of telegraph poles across the site. Will they be adequately accommodated in the site layout?
Hi, Sherry. Yeah, but I believe they're notified on the photographs as a power line.
Right.
So there may have to be a scheme where the developer diverts that or puts them underground. Right. But because of the outline nature of the application, that's yet to be determined in detail.
Right, okay. But it's been thought of. That's important. Okay, thank you very much. Questions then, please, Councillor Matt Hall.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question with regards to the design of the junction. I believe the Mppf 112A talks about priorities for pedestrians and cyclists. I don't see anything on the design that helps or aids cyclist safety. Can there be some clarification on this, please?
Would you like me to answer that one, Sherry?
Yes, please, Steve.
What you can see there, Councillor, is a standard priority junction. The junction design accommodates the to and fro movements of cyclists, in fact, of all road users, and incorporates a footway along one side. When the actual, or if it's approved and we have a reserved matters application submitted, then obviously the internal layout and the access itself will be subject to the relevant Section 38 works for public adoption, which will take on board any other comments that were, or any other guidance that we have. I think the issue of cyclists here is such that we haven't got a high level of cycling here. We sometimes allow priority junctions where we're set back the actual cycle crossing element of the junction into here, into the site. But my recommendation would be that the simple priority junction is the best here in terms of the impact on the amenities of the areas, the aesthetics and the like. But it's the simple answer to your question, which I could have given you originally, was that we'll be looking at this at the section 38 stage.
Okay, thank you.
Are you satisfied with that, Councillor Hall?
I am. It's quite nice to know that we can come back on this at a later stage should it go through. Chair, can I just ask one thing that I think might be useful for us all in the future? I noticed on page 62 of the report there is reference to a landscape and ecological management plan. It would be quite nice, I think, for members to have a little bit of training on this as to what one of those is in its entirety, because it might be useful for us at a later stage with other conditions on other applications. Thank you.
Very, very helpful suggestion. Thank you very much, Councillor Hall. I'm sure that the portfolio holder is listening and adding it to the list of training that I've already requested. So very helpful. Thank you. Councillor Brian Heatley.
Thank you, Chair. Simon, you mentioned in your presentation that there had been an ecological survey of the site and also that there is a biodiversity management plan. I read those. Although it looks like a rather empty field, it's quite important for bats, and there's a pond with the famous great crested newts in it at the top end. The bats probably will be affected just by light and disturbance, and there's not much you can do about that. The newts who are not represented here on this committee are going to be relocated. I think I was left with the feeling that although it is a plan to try to conserve the biodiversity, there's no biodiversity net gain here. There may be no opportunity for it, but it's a rescue package. Is that a fair summary?
I would take a slightly different view, Councillor Heatley. You know, there will of course be some impact in the development of an undeveloped site, but we've got a very strong planning condition 13, which will require the applicant to provide further information and a whole list of points. We've got points A to N that require the submission of further details, further mitigation measures, European protected species licenses, the great crested newt mitigation details, which will either, like you said, form relocation or there'll be a payment made to the Dorset Council Great Crested Newt licensing scheme. So there'll be a whole host of more work done to ensure that there can be at least a preservation of biodiversity quantum on this site, and in fact probably an enhancement as well. So you mentioned the bats and the impact on lighting, so you know there can be details secured to minimise the disruption caused by lighting, you know, not to have certain luminescence, to include lighting that only sort of goes down and things like that. So I'm satisfied, and the Dorset Net team is satisfied that this scheme can provide an enhancement rather than just a preservation.
Are you satisfied with that response, Councillor Heatley, for now?
Not altogether, but let's leave it for now.
Okay, yeah. I think we would all rather have crested newts than payment in lieu of crested newts, but yes, quite. Councillor Rideout, a question.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, I have a question for the developer, the applicant. I don't know if they are present at this meeting.
I don't know if they are. Could you ask your question to Simon, and then we'll see how we get on?
I will indeed. Thank you very much. Now, there is a blue lined field. It's not part of this actual application, and locals call it One Oak Field. It's a very precious field for dog walkers and recreation for the public. Now I'm wondering if the developer would consider a condition which ties that field in to protect it in perpetuity for public recreation. Thank you.
Okay. Simon, the first question I would have to ask you, would that be deemed a reasonable reasonable condition? Because as you know, ladies and gentlemen, conditions have to be reasonable and enforceable and so on. Simon.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Councillor Rideout. In my view, a condition like that wouldn't be necessary or appropriate in this case. We have to look at the application in front of us, which is only the application within the red line boundary, and the blue line, obviously, as you know, indicates just the ownership of the landowner. So it would just be for a future consideration. If an application came forward on that land, it would just have to be assessed on its own merits at that time, and we can't at this point restrict its future potential or proposals through a condition related to this application.
Okay, thank you. It's a shame because it would allay a lot of fears to the public. Thank you.
You're absolutely right. It's disappointing because it would have gone a good way to make this application more acceptable, but we are where we are. Thank you. A good question, Belinda. Councillor Penfold, you have a question.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it's a question on trees. I looked at the plan which was shown to us, and the new tree and hedge planting. Does that actually include new trees? Because as I look at this plan now, we've got trees amongst the development. Does that include those trees, or is it just the boundary of the site?
Hi, Councillor Penfold. There's planning conditions which secure the details and the future and sort of landscaping strategies of the site. So there is an opportunity to strengthen the boundary hedging. So, for instance, the most sensitive boundaries are the western and the northern boundary, which give views out to the countryside and the conservation area. And you can see there's a green sort of buffer there, which provides an opportunity for reinforcement. And then, as you can see as well, yeah, the illustrative sort of green dots around the site and the internal area of the site. Sorry, I'm on the wrong plan, but yeah, there is also an opportunity for quite substantial tree planting within the site, which provides an overall benefit.
Lovely, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cook, is this a question?
It is. It's two questions, Chairman.
Right, off you go.
One, I think probably is the first one. It's for highways.
Yes.
Mention has been made of the ability for pedestrians to get into town. Can we confirm or deny that there is a footway all the way into town?
Shall I answer that now, Chair, through you?
Yes, please. Thank you very much, Steve.
Yes, is the simple answer. You can see on the plan there, Councillor Cook, where the new footway on the northern side of the estate road comes out. It links to the existing footway, which runs along the northern side of Conmead Lane. It comes to a pinch point, and I think you can then cross over and walk through to the town, but it definitely exists because I've walked it many times myself.
Good.
Brilliant. Thank you.
That's very clear. Your second question?
And the second question is really about the weight of the two local plans that are currently in force. The first one being the North Dorset local plan, which I noticed is 2016, and the neighbourhood plan, which mention has been made that it's over 2 years old and therefore doesn't have the weight. Can I just get an indication of why the North Dorset local plan still has weight and the neighbourhood plan possibly doesn't?
Thank you. I will ask Simon just to clarify that. And of course, the third leg in this three-legged stool is, of course, the 5-year housing land supply, which is the key to how much weight any of it has. Simon, would you just like to, as briefly as you can, clarify that, please?
Yeah. Hi, Councillor Cook. Yeah, the local plan and the neighbourhood plan are both part of the adopted development plan at the moment, and they both hold weight. So there's not much difference in terms of the weight to be given to them. They're part of the statutory development plan. They should be given weight. The nuances where the local authority can't provide the 5-year housing land supply, that the presumption in favour sort of takes over, and the North Dorset local plan is consistent with the Mppf in that regard, in that it has a particular policy called the presumption in favour of sustainable development. So yeah, they're both given weight in the process. The neighbourhood plan nuance is that on occasion, paragraph 14 sets out that where a local authority doesn't have a 5-year housing land supply, but certain conditions are met, the neighbourhood plan policies are afforded weight even in light of the 5-year housing land supply issue. However, in this case, because the neighbourhood plan is over 2 years old and it doesn't allocate land for housing and a couple of other points, it's not afforded that additional weight. So it's given the same weight as the local plan, which is sort of superseded by the presumption in favour due to the lack of 5-year housing land supply. So slightly complicated and confusing, but I hope that answers your question.
Is that?
It goes a long way to answering my question. Thank you.
Yes, I mean the key phrase that members today and almost every day we have to bear in mind in the light of the 5-year housing land supply is that the harm from any application we're considering has to be significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits, and that's the key phrase to keep in mind today and indeed every day when we meet. Right, I have a question then from Councillor Jones, and then I'm coming back to Councillor Apothecary. Councillor Jones, your question, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. If we cannot bring the blue lined piece of land into any form of permitted development rights, would we as a planning committee be able to make representation to the local plan to keep that area for designated green infrastructure so that it is not allowed to be built on in the future? We can see that coming, and I just wonder if there's any way we can protect it at all. Thank you.
Certainly the ways in which should it be deemed appropriate, Gillingham I know are looking again at their neighbourhood plan, and so the Gillingham neighbourhood plan group, and we'll come to the ward members in a moment, but they could use that opportunity to make take a position on that field. I'm not sure it has already been identified as a possible site in the first draft local plan. So if that includes the blue lined area, then there's an opportunity for members when we comment on the draft Dorset local plan to comment on that site. So that's 2 opportunities. I'm not sure more further than that what we would do. I'm not. The minutes will say that you've raised that this question has been raised. Certainly, I feel that probably an informative about a piece of land that's not before a discussion about a piece of land that's not before us today probably is a little bit beyond our remit. But I'm happy to take advice on that.
All right. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I see Simon is kind of nodding and agreeing with me that it's a bit beyond our remit. I think we'll have to use because it's quite a complex discussion, Councillor, and I think we probably would need to use the other means if that's the view that councillors take. If that would satisfy you, can I ask Councillor Apothecary to come in now and make her comment?
Thank you, Chairman.
Yes.
I wanted really to address the principle of development here. We've heard an awful lot of information, and I'm sure we've all read the information received prior to the meeting as well. So we've got policy 20 of the local plan countryside is not met in this application. The development for 80 dwellings is outside the settlement boundary and in the open countryside. The 2019 SHLA stated that development would be potentially viable in this location, subject to policy change. This change has not been made, and so is in conflict with the spatial strategy. The adopted Gillingham Neighbourhood Plan Policy 22 states that the land is an area of search for new green space, and should be safeguarded to provide much needed outdoor recreation. Just to say, many months ago, the town council tried to purchase the land for the junior football team, who currently have to travel to a nearby village, which is pretty unacceptable for a town of 12,000 people. Although the landowner was very keen for it to be used for this purpose, it had unfortunately been recently promised to the applicant. So it's all very well making Section 106 contributions to informal outdoor space, but where will this be found if the identified space has been built upon? And all other possible sites around the town seem to be under siege from speculative developers. There's also a Section 106 contribution to bus services and bus stop, but there are no buses or community transport into town. People won't manage without a car. All this when DC has declared a climate emergency. I believe the site is unsustainable. Excuse me. Planning policy says that clear and convincing justification is needed for a development near or in a conservation area, taking into account heritage assets. Everything I've read, I have to say nothing has been produced to justify building on this site. The emerging local plan GIL 3 can't be considered. Members will know it's an early stage in the process and a very long way from being made. Therefore, the neighbourhood plan carries more weight. Common Mead Lane is exactly that, a country lane offering a back way into the town from nearby villages. Although the access may or may not be acceptable, turning right out of this proposed development would take you down a steep lane, often frozen and ice covered in winter, and into Kind Bush Lane, all of which is narrow, undesignated and mostly single carriageway with no footway or usable verges, past Etcliffe Mill, which of course is prone to flooding, to the B3092. The use of this route is against NPPF, local policy and DFT guidance. But due to the traffic congestion in Gillingham, lots of drivers use this route as a rat run to avoid the town. It's a bad situation already, and an additional 80 homes will make it even more dangerous to Etcliffe residents and local walkers and riders. And I should say this route is on a designated cycle route that goes all out round the villages. The local plan stated that the scale of housing development for Gillingham for the period 2011-2031 would be 2,200 new homes. These, of course, would be on the southern extension. This substantial figure was supported by the Gillingham Neighbourhood Plan, which was made just 3 years ago. And that's why no further land was allocated, because we were advised, and I was on the Neighbourhood Plan group, that we wouldn't need to allocate further land because of the southern extension. Since the plan was the Neighbourhood Plan was made, the town's received applications for over 2,000 homes, with a further 200 expected at Station Road. So that target has already been met, with 10 more years to go. It's completely unjust to foist another 80 dwellings on a site earmarked for much needed sport and recreation for our community, particularly when the only justification is the tilted balance. It's stated by the applicant that a consultation took place with local residents being leafleted. Unfortunately, the leaflet had the wrong response link, causing much frustration to residents and the town council who they complained to. This accounts for the low response. You will notice, however, that 128 residents have sent letters of objection to the planning officer. Finally, I would just like to say that this committee is well aware of Gillingham's approach to development. We're not NIMBYs, and we have a fine record of supporting projects with the necessary infrastructure, particularly with the planned 1,800 new homes on the Southern Strategic Site and Master Plan framework. Much land has already been allocated for this substantial growth, as per the next item on the agenda, and is widely supported by residents. So several reasons have been given why this development is against a range of planning policies. Outside the settlement boundary with no bus service, the impact on heritage and conservation sites, the loss of identified and valuable recreation space, concerns for biodiversity and no real gain for the community, plus serious traffic issues. I have to say that those views concur with my own. I cannot support this application and I earnestly ask that members withhold consent for all the reasons given. Thank you. I'm sorry it was so long.
Not at all. That was very helpful. Thank you. You are not at this point, as you've just said, you're not proposing just yet a refusal. You're just urging us. Is that right?
I'm very happy to propose refusal, Chairman.
I don't want to force you into it. You can do that later. Yes.
On the basis that I couldn't possibly vote for it, I'm very happy to propose voting against it.
Okay, but then we will have to have the grounds for that. While you think about that, I will, because I don't want to bounce anybody into things. I'm going to, and I'm sure Councillor Fry will bear with me while I do this. I'm going to leapfrog Councillor Fry and ask Councillor Rideout, who is the other ward member for Gillingham, because I think it's important that we hear from you next, Councillor Rideout. As the other ward member.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Well, you may know, when I first became a councillor, I worked very hard with colleagues to have Parts of Wight designated as a conservation area because of its historic content and listed buildings. North Dorset District Council at that time thought it was important to include what we call heron fields, and these are the fields that abut, or they're right up against the blue lined field, as we call One Oak Field. And it was important to have those fields within the conservation area because it protected the views in and out of the conservation area, and also up to Thorngrove and the ancient Queen's Farm site, and obviously views back into the conservation area. So this is my opinion on this particular application. I don't think it's a particularly sustainable location. As we know, it's outside the settlement boundary and there is no regular bus service. Obviously that could change. We've heard that it's contrary to policies in the local plan, the Spatial Strategy and the Gillingham Neighbourhood Plan. And the Gillingham Neighbourhood Plan, as we've heard, identified the area for outdoor recreation. The big thing for me is the density of this site, the proposed density up to 80 dwellings. This is contrary to the Gillingham Neighbourhood Plan Policy 23. 21 dwellings per hectare. That might not seem very much compared to other sites we've looked at, but we've got to remember this is edge of town going into very rural countryside. Just to the west of this site, the lane narrows to single carriageway. Next door, Freem Way, the development to the east of the site is 13 dwellings per hectare. So you can see there is quite a difference in the density. Now, Freem Way is correct because it's a transition into the countryside. But here we go, we have a proposal which then ups the density, which I find is quite mind-boggling, really. So it doesn't respect the rural character of the area, that transition into the countryside. And of course, then the harmful impact on the settings of the heritage assets, Thorngrove itself, the Queen's Farm and the Wight Conservation Area, because during the winter months, although it's, as you can see, there's quite a landscape and trees around the perimeter of the site, in the winter months the development will be seen from sensitive locations. My dilemma though here with this application, we're looking at the access, and perhaps my reasons are stated are not significant or demonstrably adequate to refuse the application, particularly given the local planning authorities' land supply issues and the weight we are to give to the Gillingham Neighbourhood Plan. But I believe this proposal does not respect the rural character of the area for the reasons I gave earlier, and should this be approved, I would not support a development of such density at the reserved matters stage unless it was on a scale more to the Freem Way of 13 dwellings per hectare. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Can I just hold that thought? We need to just be very clear, because if we are, this is an outline application only, considering access, but if we approve this application for up to 80 dwellings, we have effectively approved it for up to 80 dwellings. And so we have to be aware that that's what we would be doing here. Simon, do you want to just clarify that to make sure that that statement is absolutely correct? Because what we can't do is approve this and then hope to come back and have another bite at it later to reduce the number of dwellings, because that's not how it will work. Simon, is that correct?
Yes, that's right, Sherry. Officers and landscape officers and urban design officers have satisfied themselves that up to 80 dwellings could be comfortably accommodated on this site. And so, yeah, we'd expect to be able to approve future reserve matters applications that came in with a similar layout to that's been seen today. And I'll just make a comment, if I may, on density. Density, I can understand the point that Councillor Rideout makes in terms of the density of Freem Way versus the density proposed here. There's a key difference. When Freem Way was built, it was prior to the Mppf. So the Mppf has now been published, which says that local authorities should refuse permission for sites that don't make effective use of land. So I think, in my opinion, in today's arena, if we were given a site with the density of 13 dwellings per hectare in a location close to a major town, it probably wouldn't be supported. So a slight increase in density is more in accordance with the policy provisions today, especially in light of the lack of housing land supply. So I think density grounds would be very dangerous to go down, and there is no local plan policy setting specific densities.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. Councillor Fry.
Thank you, Chair. My question is around the sports pitches. Page 21 mentions that the formal sports pitches have been identified or illustrated in the Gillingham neighbourhood plan. Page 23 says there's not been any formal approaches to the landowner with respect to the use of the land since the neighbourhood plan was made in 2018. Yet we hear from the local member that the land was promised anywhere and the request for sports pitches has been turned down. Either there is or there isn't. Can we hear more about that? Because one of the things we do consider is amenity land for local communities. This looks like it's been identified, but then somebody has worked out that they can make more money from land development and has not helped turn this into sports pitches. Can we have some information, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Simon. And just to be clear, the motives of developers is not a planning consideration. Thank you very much, Simon. Can you just clarify the position with regard to the allocation of this land for sports pitches, please?
Yeah, hi, Councillor Fry. Yeah, there's no evidence before me in terms of the planning application about any formal offers for the site to the landowner in representations or within the agent's planning documentation. So that wasn't considered.
Right.
But then we hear a different side from the local ward member that an application has been made and has been turned down.
For football.
Yes.
Okay, that there's a certain amount of lack of clarity, but in terms, just to clarify the position for other members, as far as I understand it, this site is allocated in the Gillingham neighbourhood plan as a possible site for recreational use, and the view we've heard from Councillor Apothecary is that there's a shortage of other available sites. That much at least is the case, but that's it. There's been no formal applications.
Has there an alternative site for football or sports been identified within Gillingham if this was not used for such?
Councillor Fry, there is fairly significant provision that's being brought forward in the Gillingham Southern Extension. There's two sets of sports pitch areas, one in the central section of the site and one on the site to the furthest to the east, which has been delivered by CG Fry. So there will be football pitches and associated other provision with pavilions. So there is provision coming forward into the future.
Thank you.
That's helpful. Can I, Councillor Heatley, I see you're waiting, but I can I bring Councillor Apothecary in if it's on this question of sports pitches, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor Heatley, if that's all right.
Thank you, Chairman. I was advised by the town clerk that she had informally approached the landowner to ask if I believe it's a lady, would sell the town council this site, and which is what I made mention to, and she said she would be very keen for that to happen, but unfortunately she had very recently committed the site to the developer. So that's all I know on this.
Okay, that's, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that's as much as we're aware of factually. That's helpful. Councillor Heatley, please.
Thank you, Chair. You have reminded us on a couple of occasions that we can only refuse this application if the adverse effects of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. That is the essential judgment we have to make. The benefits are further housing, in particular a significant chunk of affordable housing, and the other effects on the economy, not least the construction when it's going on. We've had quite a long list of impacts, of unhappy impacts. For example, the loss of open space, and in particular the potential loss of sports space, possibly. And I think one impact of that is quite important on further housing development in Gillingham generally, because these are things which make the whole of Gillingham suitable for further housing, is that there is this kind of space for infrastructure. We've heard that there may be, well, I think there may be some biodiversity loss. We've heard that there may be some loss of amenity to nearby housing, although it might be mitigated. We've heard of potential damage to the nearby conservation area, and we've also heard about some of the issues around the highway network, where we have a rather small road serving a new development. Okay, it may not be a severe impact, but there's probably an impact. Now, I listen to all that and I think, well, there is not one of those that significantly and demonstrably outweighs the benefits of this development, but it's a cumulative list. It's quite a long list of quite a lot of items. My question is, am I allowed to consider all those impacts together in coming to that overall balance? It's not that I have to find one of them that significantly outweighs the benefits. Surely I can find that cumulatively the list of things that have been brought up today do outweigh the benefits. Is that right or not?
That is definitely right. I mean, whether or not it's a matter of judgment as to where the weight goes, but yes, it's a list of benefits, and as you've just outlined, it's also a list of harm. And the question before the committee is, does the list of harm, and as you say, there's a considerable list of harms, do the harms themselves cumulatively outweigh the benefits cumulatively? But again, significantly.
Yeah, significant.
So you can consider them all, but they still have to amount to a considerable weight to outweigh the list of benefits, and that's what you have to weigh up here. Is that right, Simon?
Yes, that's right, Sherry. I just make the point that those harms and things that have been mentioned are many of them are sort of alleged, and there's no objections from any of the statutory consultees on any of those points that have just been raised.
Yes, thank you. I was just coming to it because that's the key point, that the harms that you've listed there, some of them have been addressed, and for example, highways harm, it would be difficult for this committee to refuse on grounds of highways harm when our highways officer has said that in his view there is no, that the highways is acceptable. I think the same with conservation harm. Our conservation officer has said that the conservation impact is acceptable. So we have to be able to substantiate our list of harms, and it's very difficult to do that if our officers advised us that that's not the view that they take. So I'm not trying to steer the committee, but I'm just trying to make sure that we fully understand that we fully understood the advice that we've been given. Mike, Mike Garrity, Head of Planning, you'd like to come in now, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I wanted to just pick up on a couple of points that were made, just as much as anything to clarify. It's worth bearing in mind that the 5-year housing land supply issue is something that relates to the local plan area as well. That's quite important. So, and it is a significant issue as far as the presumption in favour of sustainable development. So there has been the question about cumulative impacts and whether or not those would outweigh that presumption. But as Simon has pointed out, some of those issues, we do not have any formal objections from the bodies that represent those issues, such as heritage issues, for example. I just wanted to also pick up on the matter of the sustainability of the location or otherwise. We have had a number of situations involving, for example, individual dwellings on the edge of settlement, and when they're right on the boundary of the settlement, it's quite often the case that they're seen to be relatively sustainable because of their location. So there was mention made of bus routes and the like, but given the fact that Gillingham is well served by things like railway station and there's footpath links to the town centre, I think we would struggle from a planning point of view to argue that there was any issue about the sustainability, and we have had some difficulty in arguing those in appeals in situations past in other locations. So I think that's worth bearing in mind. So the report that you have before you is advising you on the basis of our understanding of where we stand in a planning policy point of view and what we can actually justify. Thank you.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much. Phil Crowther, our solicitor, you would like to come in now, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to clarify one point about the heritage judgment, and so that the conservation officer did identify that there was less than significant harm, and it's for the committee to determine whether the benefits of the development outweigh that harm. So you've had the advice that it is less than substantial harm, but at the very lowest end of that scale, or at the low end of the scale, that still has to be given significant weight in the balance, but it is up to the committee to make that judgment.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you very much. So there's less than substantial harm, but harm nonetheless. So we have to determine whether or not we consider that is sufficient to outweigh the benefits. Again, it's this question in the context of the tilted balance. Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you very much. I'm going to come back now, if I may, to Councillor Apothecary in the light of the. Can I just say, is there anybody, before I do that, anybody who would like to speak in favour of this application specifically? You don't have to, but I need to just hear in case there's anybody who takes a different view. I'm not seeing anything coming yet. Yes, Carol Jones. Thank you very much, Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I understand where the ward councillors are coming from, but I also see the case that our officers have made, and I would think this would be very hard to hold up at appeal, so I will be voting in favour of this application.
Right, thank you very much. I think you've put your finger on the nub of it. It's what we feel can be supported at appeal, don't we? I have Councillor Stella Jones.
I agree with Councillor Carol Jones.
Yeah.
I think we would lose at appeal. I think we have the advantages of having this outweigh the difficulties of not having it.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much. And Councillor Penfold.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I would agree with the previous two speakers. I think it will be very difficult at appeal. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. I want to now return then to Councillor Apothecary, and because you said that you would be voting against it, but you did not formally propose that we should oppose this application, and I need to give you the opportunity now to clarify your position on that as the ward member, because nobody has yet proposed that we should support it. Nobody has yet proposed that we should oppose it.
Thank you, Chairman. I would definitely like to propose that we refuse this application for all the reasons that I took a long time to describe. And the basis basically is that, you know, our own policy 20 of the local plan said it would be potentially viable for development subject to policy change, and we haven't changed our policy. So it doesn't meet our own policies, and that's the nub of this. I do understand about the tilted balance, you know, even though we've got all these hundreds and hundreds of new homes being built in Gillingham. I do understand the tilted balance. We just, the community, nobody in the town wants these to be built there. So I have to stand against it, and I would, I'm very pleased to propose refusal.
Okay, and this is proposal on the grounds that it is not compliant with policy 20 of the North Dorset local plan.
I think that's the nub of it, actually, Chairman. There are lots of other reasons.
Well,
as Councillor Heatley said, it's the cumulative effect, really.
Right. Okay.
I'm happy to second that, Chairman. I fully get what Councillor Penfold is saying, and given Councillor Heatley's comments as well, I fully understand that individual officers looking at their own individual sphere of knowledge don't have the objections, but collectively, when we look at the overall aspect of it, given that there is more development that is supported by the neighbourhood plan in other areas, fully supported by the neighbourhood plan, I think that's our grounds for contesting any appeal. And it has to be borne in mind, at least from my own point of view, that if we are not to take the decision, if the decision is forced upon us, we may as well all pack up and go home. And I don't mean that in any other disrespectful way. If the decision has already been, if you like, taken for us by legislation and the possibility of going to appeal, it seems that we are possibly wasting taxpayers' time and money by sitting to determine appeals, determine planning applications, if the decision is going to be taken out of our hands immediately. So I would like to support Councillor Penfold.
Okay, thank you. Just to be clear, no decision is ever forced upon this committee by me or by anybody else.
No, I didn't mean by you, but by the mere framework in which we are working.
Yes, that is the purpose of this committee, but we do work, as any quasi-judicial body does, within a legal framework, and we need to be. And there are, of course, constraints, and there are enormous constraints on Dorset Council's planning at the moment, as we all know. So I'm going to I'm going to have to ask, before we put this refusal vote, we're going to have to do a little bit more work, in my view, on the grounds for refusal, because I don't think they're robust enough yet. But I'm going to ask Mike Garrity to come in first. Mike.
Thanks, Chairman. Yes, I just wanted to comment on that reason for refusal, because it's important to know that we still have to demonstrate that there is harm if there's an argument here. The fact that there's the policy 20, there are circumstances that have been outlined in the report where the officer report considers that there are reasons that override that policy, and the presumption of sustainable development comes in. So I personally do not think it's sufficient for us to just say that it's considered contrary to that policy, because there are grounds that we would use to interpret that policy and say we consider that the proposal is acceptable and has for other reasons. So it has to be shown that there is actual harm caused by that development taking place in that location. So I would say that the committee would need to substantiate that reason as to why it's considered harm is caused by the development going ahead in this location.
Yes, thank you. That's very, very helpful. That was what was worrying me. So we haven't yet established clear enough, in my view, grounds to put this to the vote for refusal. And I've had a proposer and a seconder. The loss of the outdoor amenity space, that's being proposed as one of the grounds. Recreation space. Councillor Apothecary, this is your proposal. I need some slightly firmer grounds to put this to the vote. I don't want to press you, but
no, I do understand, Chairman, and it is difficult, but it is contrary, as we've said, to policy 20 of our local plan, and the adopted Gillingham Neighbourhood Plan policy 22, which identifies it for outdoor recreation space. I do also feel that it actually is unsustainable, this site. I know it's very easy to look at pictures and see that it's on the end of a road that leads into the town, but I can assure you there won't be very many people walking it, and there is no bus service, so it will be, you know, it won't be compliant with our declared climate emergency for Dorset Council either. I don't know if that has any impact at all.
That's helpful. Yes, the case that sustainability is a grounds, whether or not. So we've got so far the loss of the identified outdoor amenity space,
yes,
and the fact that you're objecting in the fact that you're objecting on grounds that you believe the site is not sustainable.
Yes.
Yes, and any more for any more? Councillor Jones is asking, if this proposal is used, will we lose any of the rights on sections of reservation? If this proposal is reviewed, then all of the section 106 agreement falls, because that's an agreement that we have on the understanding that it is.
Sorry, Chair, I meant if it is one on an appeal. Sorry, that's what I meant. If it's one on appeal.
If it's one on appeal, no, the section 106 is still there in appeal. Yes, but we don't want to be refusing something on the understanding that it's subsequently going to be one on appeal, because that's not us doing our job quite as well as we should be. But I know that's not what you said, Councillor Jones, but yes.
Sorry, could I make a quick point on the sustainability point,
yes,
please?
Please do.
I understand the concerns about the site in terms of sustainability, but I think we really need to sort of really articulate why the site's not sustainable, because we did run an argument about sustainability on an Edges settlement site in Shaftesbury before, and the inspector didn't find in favour of us, and there was costs awarded in that instance. So I think we have to be very careful when we're talking about our main towns in the northern area, and it's an Edges settlement site, really why this is not sustainable form of development, because it's similar to other sites that we've allocated around the town to meet our, you know, significant housing needs within the area. So I think the lack of a bus route in its own right may not be sufficient to justify it being unsustainable. I think it is contrary to Policy 20, because Policy 20 does say that development should be within the settlement boundaries, and Simon's explained that really clearly. We have to go past that and say, what's the demonstrable harm of it being located outside of the settlement? So the fact that there is a policy conflict there is not necessarily enough in this instance without some other material harm. Now, the other harms that have been identified have been conservation, that's been pointed out. There is less than substantial harm caused to the White Conservation Area and to a monument. That's identified in the report, but that's less than substantial harm, and the public benefits of the scheme are considered to outweigh that less than substantial harm. When you get to that point, and you've outweighed the less than substantial harm by public benefit, you can re-engage the tilted balance and the presumption in favour of sustainable development. So that's the process we have to go through. If we're finding that there's public benefits that outweigh the harm to heritage, we have to then apply the presumption. But that's what members have to grapple with, is that harm. I think out of everything, that's what's been identified where there is harm. The other points in terms of density, sustainability, are probably more difficult to argue at appeal. And also character, as Simon's pointed out, because the very low density is not something that we could replicate really on this site.
Excuse me, Chairman, can I come in here?
Yes, please do.
Thank you.
Yes.
A lot has been mentioned about the benefits. And to be honest with you, I can't really see the benefits. We have ample work in Gillingham for the building that is taking place on the identified southern extension. Lots and lots of building as per the next application. So it's not a matter of jobs for people. You know, the southern extension has, as you know, it does have the whole development plan that goes with that, everything that's needed. Nobody's mentioned, I'm just throwing in things now, but you know, the little primary school at Wyke won't be able to take all these extra kids. There's lots and lots of small things that just don't make this application stack up when we've got an identified site with everything going in, all the infrastructure, you know, which will give work to people and starter homes for people, and all the other things that are supposed to be benefits. They're not for this place, but they have been identified and made room for elsewhere on the other end of town.
Thank you. Simon, could you put the list of benefits up on the screen, please, for members to see, just to remind ourselves what the list of benefits that have been identified are. Thank you. And in the meantime, Councillor Matt Hall is asking about NPPF policy 97, this being used as an open space, and whether that's relevant. Perhaps while Simon is looking for his list of benefits, Hannah, could you tell us if the fact that this is used as an open space has any relevance here?
Yeah. Hi, Sherry. I'll just respond quickly on the point. In terms of the delivery of the Gillingham Southern allocation, even with the delivery of all of those houses, which are counted in the current 5-year housing land supply, even with those, there is still a requirement for quite a significant number above that level to meet demand. So I think that should just be noted. And then I will.
So with respect, the 2,200 we were allocated up until 2031, which we've already achieved, isn't enough. And whilst I do understand that, you know, could we not accommodate more homes where we've built the infrastructure? We've had lots of infill sites in the last couple of years, and this site really has been. I should say I worked on the neighbourhood plan for 6 years, and this site was very much identified as an open space, recreational space for that end of town. Just getting from one end of town to the other at the moment is tricky. So, you know, kids need some space that end, actually. Sorry.
Right. No, thank you. We must resolve this. I just had a response to Councillor Hall's question about the open space. This is not a formal open space. It has a public right of way running through it, which will be retained. So that addresses that question. Look, we've had a proposer and a seconder to refuse this on grounds that it is contrary to policy 20, but we and that the it's an unsustainable site, but we've been challenged that, and that it would lose the loss of a site that's allocated as possibly needed for recreational space. I've given you as long as I can. That would seem to be the grounds for objection that you've come up with, Councillor Pothecary and Councillor Cook. So I'm going to have to move to the vote on that. And now we have biodiversity. Could we have a word? You're adding biodiversity, yes, please. What's the biodiversity harm that you're identifying then, please?
I think it was mentioned by Councillor Heatley that this is sorry, my phone's just phone's just gone there. The habitat, the bats. It was mentioned by Simon that possibly a financial contribution could be made to the Dorset Biodiversity Group. However, I think it was even yourself, Chairman, that mentioned that a financial payment in lieu of loss of habitat, loss of species, or the impact on those things is not the same thing. I think if there are issues that the wildlife use this area just as much as us humans do, then paying to move them doesn't have any meaning to those species.
So biodiversity, we're talking loss of habitat. Good. Mike Garrity, please, because I'm really struggling with this. It's not sounding very robust to me, but I hear what you're saying. Mike.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I do have some concerns that I don't want us to be seen to be inventing reasons for refusing something when we have a number of sites that these issues are perfectly adequately dealt with through condition or through contributions, and without any sustenance of argument against those impacts. I think we're at danger of grasping at straws a little bit here. Yeah. My personal view, and Simon perhaps could correct me if I'm wrong on this, is that where officers would steer you is if members feel that they really do not want this development to go ahead, then the policy 20 issue in relation to potential heritage impacts is the area that we see the less than substantial harm is possibly the only area that we feel has got any merit. I honestly don't think that the sustainability of location, given history of other sites, is one that we think we could substantiate, and equally on the biodiversity, without any evidence before us that there's an impact or objections on that ground, I don't think that's something that we could. So I wanted to mention that before you come to a view and make a final decision. But that's the steer I think that we've got. And Simon, I don't know whether there's anything you felt you needed to just add to that or correct me on if I've got something wrong in the nuance of that.
No, that's fine, Mike. No, I agree with what you say. I just make a point of clarification on the biodiversity point. So the Dorset Net team are satisfied that the condition attached to the application will secure the requisite mitigation for newts and bats and all of the other species that are relevant. So point A of that condition requires the submission of a further impact assessment, which includes habitat losses and gains, and a demonstration of measurable biodiversity net gain, European Protected Species Mitigation Licence as required for great crested newts, or a compensation payment certificate issued under the Dorset Council GCN licence scheme. So that there's really no need or justified reason to include biodiversity as a reason for refusal, in my opinion.
Thank you. Look, councillors Cook and Pothecary, you've been given a very clear steer here that sustainability and biodiversity, these won't run. They're not. You know, it's up to you. But we've been given a very clear steer that those grounds for refusal are not robust enough. Mike has just told us there that really the only grounds that we can run with would be the heritage impact, which has less than substantial harm, and the committee could take a view that nonetheless that harm outweighs the benefits. I paraphrased that, Mike, but was that about right?
Excuse me, Tim, would not loss of amenity land come into this?
I think loss of amenity land could certainly come into it, because that's a very key point for so we could go with point 2, the loss of the land which has been earmarked, which has been identified as a possible amenity site. It's another point that stands.
Thank you.
Identified as possible site for recreation. Right. So we have 2 grounds there. I'm councillors Cook and Pothecary, Pothecary and Cook. That's the 2 grounds that we have here. Mike, sorry, are you going to steer me against those as well?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Chair. Yeah, so so depending on the outcome of the decision of the committee, you're effectively arguing that the impact. I mean, I'm sort of summarising this within the context of Policy 20, that due to the less than substantial harm on the heritage asset and the potential for the site to be considered for amenity recreation are the reasons why you think that there is harm to that policy, that in your view would, if you came to that view, would override the presumption in favour of sustainable development and the other benefits that come with bringing the site forward.
Yes.
That's what I've gathered from what you've discussed.
Right. Okay, members, did you hear? Mike has just clarified the position as to what I'm now going to ask you to vote. So we're basically going to put to the vote now a proposal that we object to this application on those grounds. So I hope you were all listening carefully, because this is important, because we need to talk very carefully about this, because I have to say, committee members, you must now vote on this, but it's only fair to tell you as your chairman that I think those grounds are quite slim, and so I need to be sure that you've listened very carefully to what you are voting on. Without wishing to in any way steer the committee, it would be I would be doing less than my job fairly if I didn't tell you that they sound quite slim to me. But if we're now ready, we will proceed to the vote, and we've had a proposer and a seconder that we will oppose this application on the grounds just outlined by Mike, and I see Phil is looming there. Does that mean you want to tell me something before we go to the vote, or are you happy that we go to the vote?
Chairman, I just think for form's sake, and I may have missed it, but I just think you need to check with the proposer and the seconder that they are happy to go ahead with the proposal to refuse on those two grounds.
Thank you very much. That's what I just did, but if it wasn't clear, I will just do it again. I'm asking Councillors Apothecary and Cook, are you prepared to go ahead with your proposal on for refusal on those two grounds outlined by Mike?
Yes, I am, Chairman. Thank you.
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Yes, that's helpful, Phil. Let's get that in the record. Right, I'm going to now invite you to vote alphabetically, please. And and bear in mind, if you say for, you're for opposing this. So what we're voting on is a proposal to reject this application. So, Councillor Cook.
For.
You're for rejecting it. Councillor Fry.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Hall.
For.
Yes. Councillor Heatley. Councillor Heatley. I'll come back to Councillor Heatley. Councillor Jones.
Against.
Against. Councillor Stella Jones. Sorry.
Against.
Against. Councillor Mary Penfold.
Against.
Councillor Apothecary.
For.
Councillor Rideout.
For.
You're for. Right. Councillor Heatley.
For.
I make that a 4 and 4, which means I will use my vote, which, as we know,
Chairman, sorry, it's Elaine here. I believe there was 5 for the refusal.
Who have I got?
Councillor Cook, Councillor Hall, Councillor Heatley, Councillor Apothecary and Councillor Rideout.
Cook, Hall, Apothecary, Rideout, and Councillor Heatley was 4.
He was 4.
Right. Okay. So Martin. Okay. Right. In which case, that refusal is carried. Thank you very much. Right, I think what we will do now, ladies and gentlemen, is have a 10-minute comfort break. It's now 12:02, so if we could come back, I'll give you a little more than 10 minutes. If we could come back at 12:15 promptly, please, and then we will take our next agenda item. If I could ask everyone, please, to turn your cameras and your microphones off, because even though we're having a break, the broadcast remains live. So if you're chatting away in your kitchens, the public can hear you. So thank you very much. Thanks.
You're muted, Sherry.
Thank you. Welcome back to the Northern Area Planning Committee after that short comfort break. In all the excitement just before we broke there, I forgot to finish the procedure there in line with our Dorset Council's COVID regulations. So I now have to ask the Head of Planning, Mike Garrity, as the designated officer to confirm the minded to decision made by the committee under delegated powers in conformity with the Dorset Council Code of Procedures. Mike.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, you can hear me okay, can you?
Yes, thank you very much.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, I confirm I've heard the debate and that this application will be determined in line with the committee's minded to decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes. Good. We move on then to our next agenda item, which is agenda item 5B, application for 115 dwellings on land east of Loddon Lakes in Gillingham. Again, this is an outline application to consider access only. This is very much Gillingham's show today, isn't it? Simon McFarlane, if you'd like to make your presentation, please. Thank you very much. In answer to your question, Councillor Cook, no, another roll call is not required after this break. It will be required after the full lunch break, however. Yes, carry on.
Thank you, Sherry. Yeah, sorry, it's me again. This will be my last one today. And I will just share my presentation. Okay, hopefully you can see that.
Yes, thank you.
Good. So yeah, this is the outline application to develop land by erection of up to 115 dwellings, vehicular access taken from New Road at Loddon Lakes phase 1 and the formation of public open space. So starting with the aerial view, the crude red circle here indicates the approximate location of the site, just to the south of Gillingham town and just to the east of the B3092. This site's probably very familiar to the committee. We've had several applications in recent months relating to the Gillingham Southern Extension. So this site is really the last, well, one of the last pieces of the residential area jigsaw. So it forms part 2 of the Loddon Lakes, which is the white zone here. Phase 1, which is a round section, is currently under construction and has planning permission. And this finishes off phase 2 for 115 dwellings. Just a definitive area here. This is phase 2. So to the south of the site is bounded by the River Loddon. This is the site that's controlled by Welbeck, which will also be predominantly residential development. To the east of the site are some fishing lakes. The western edge is bounded by the B Road, and to the west of the B Road, in the plan, there will be an extension to Brickfields Business Park at some point in the future. This is a photograph looking north towards Gillingham. Roughly, site access will be sort of in this location here. This is the River Loddon that marks the southern boundary of the site. You see the field is currently used for agriculture. There aren't an awful lot to see in the photographs apart from mainly the field and the hedgerows, but this is the view from the southern part of the site towards the business park over here in the distance. So this is the western edge of the site. This will be the northern edge of the site in the far distance. The bottom photograph shows the view towards the west, looking towards the fishing lakes. These hedgerows demarcate the boundary of those. So the top picture is the view looking south across the site. That view to the south will eventually, at some point in the long-term future be developed for the rest of the allocation. And the site to the bottom there is the view looking north towards phase 1, which is currently under construction. You can see the southern edge of the sort of settlement at the far end there. So this is where the access will go from phase 2 into phase 1. And then just going to a bit of sort of background history to the site. This is an extract from the master plan framework. The master plan framework was something that was required by Policy 21. So the developers, Taylor Wimpey, Welbeck, CG Fry, in consultation with the community and with council officers, worked together to create this document, which really set out the sort of illustrative vision for the overall site. So this is an extract in terms of setting out the land uses. We can see this is phase 2 here. So the envisaged land uses coloured in salmon, which is residential development, and then to the south of the site, to the buffer of the River Loddon, it was envisaged that that would be informal open space. This is also part of the master plan framework. So this was the illustrative density that would be acceptable on the site. Phase 2 here, shown in lilac, describes a density range that would be acceptable between 25 dwellings per hectare and 32.5 dwellings per hectare in the low density range, with a small area of slightly higher density, creating a road frontage and entrance to the site. This is an illustrative wider plan of the whole of the southern extension. We can see a slightly more detail starting to come in. So the yellow is residential development, and we can see the access coming in from the B road through into phase 1, with the green spaces adjacent to the river. So what we see here is the illustrative master plan that's been submitted to the outline planning application that's before you today. It has very much considered those background documents and has proposed a development that's commensurate with all of those parameters that have been set out. So we've got residential land use in the section of the site that was identified. The parameter plans indicate some building heights, which show that there'll be some increase in height and density at the road edge over here. We've got the access off New Road, part of the site that will be given a detailed permission that runs through into phase 1. And then we've got this large area of open space, informal recreation and biodiversity buffers to the River Loddon. So very much in accordance with the envisaged plan for the site, and so it's given full support by officers. No issues have been raised with this plan. So yes, this is the detailed site access coming from the B road for the first 15-20 metres, which has raised no issues with our transport colleagues. I'll let Steve go into further detail about that after my presentation. So being next to a river, the site is at some risk of flooding, and that's been taken into account, and there's residential development has been located outside of the extent of the floodplain, which is pretty much along this line here. And then we've got SUDS features that are also outside of those flood extents. So only the area to the south, which is the informal space, will be subject to flooding in the worst case events. In terms of our assessment of the nearby heritage assets, we'll see here that this is phase 2, and sorry, crudely located by my red circle. The heritage assets are located and shown by these little blue triangles, and this area here is a scheduled ancient monument. So the blue triangles are listed buildings, and we consider that the distance in between the site and these assets is such that there'd be no harm to their significance or their setting, and Conservation Officer is satisfied with that conclusion. Archaeology again, the applicant was requested to carry out trial trenching, which they've done to a large extent over the summer months, foiled somewhat by the wet weather, which meant that the southern western edge of the site remains to be completed, but with the provision of these quite numerous trenches throughout the northern section of the site, which have shown very low findings of low significance, the council's senior archaeologist is satisfied that the development can proceed and further work will be secured by planning condition. So infrastructure planning obligations to be included within the section 106. These are commensurate with the obligations that have been sought from the other sections of the allocation on the Gillingham Southern Extension. Very similar, quite significant suite of contributions towards transport infrastructure, green infrastructure, social infrastructure, and particularly important perhaps is the contributions towards the principal street and the commuted sums for the principal street, which will be paid towards the council. That's I think this week or next week starting work on that significant piece of infrastructure to help facilitate this wider development, so that is good news. So in conclusion, the site is allocated in the North Dorset local plan under policy 21. The development accords with that policy and with the master plan framework. The provision of 115 new homes with policy compliant 25% affordable housing is to be given great weight, and there are significant economic and social benefits attached to that. The 106 secures the relevant planning obligations, including the contributions towards the principal street, and overall it's compliant with local plan policies and the national planning policy framework. So therefore the recommendation from your officers is to grant, subject to the section 106 and planning conditions, and similar to the last case, the applicant has agreed a shorter time frame to submit reserve matters in light of the housing land supply situation. And on that note, I'll go back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much again. Another very clear and well presented report. Thank you very much, Simon. Steve Savage, would you like to come in now and address the highways matters? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, as you heard, the vehicular access is from New Road, which is classified to B3092, and this access will take the form of a new priority junction. And the important point to note is that we will not compromise the potential for an access to the land opposite, which Simon mentioned, the extension to the Brickfields industrial estate. The development will also be accessed from the existing or the currently being constructed phase 1 residential development to the north, which is served from Addison Close. Now, as you've heard, the main access is to be formed onto the B3092, which is currently subject to the national speed limit. Data collected by automatic traffic counters on either side of the proposed access position actually revealed that the approach speeds were around 40 miles per hour. And the visibility displays, which again you saw in an earlier drawing, have been provided to that speed, which fully comply with safety guidance. Swept path analysis has been provided, which confirms that all vehicles can freely turn in and out of the new junction. And again, as the other sites we just discussed, the proposed site access has been subject to a stage 1 road safety audit, which has been prepared by independent auditors, and the results of which have been accepted by the Highway Authority. The application is supported by a transport statement, which looks at the impact of up to 115 dwellings in this site. It then also accounted for the traffic from this phase going through phase 1, eventually joining the B3092 at its junction with Addison Close. And it confirmed that the junction will operate with ample capacity at peak hours. So bearing the above in mind, Chair, the authority considers that the submitted transport statement is robust and satisfactory. The residual impacts of the proposed development cannot be considered to be severe in terms of the Mppf, and hence has recommended a conditional approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Steve. That's very helpful. We will hear next from the ward member, Councillor David Walsh.
Thank you very much, Chairman. What a morning. I will keep this brief. So good morning, Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to address this committee. Good afternoon, committee. You have heard me speaking about the Gillingham Southern Extension many times before. Undoubtedly, because the people of Gillingham master planned every detail of this development over many years. That I can say, because I've been involved with it over the last 9 years. As you will have read, and they are facts that you already know, the Gillingham Town Council, the adopted Gillingham Neighbourhood Plan, and the adopted North Dorset Council Local Plan support this development. It has been the backbone of development for North Dorset, and it is imperative that we get on with it as soon as possible. There is a danger in not getting on with it. Perhaps we've seen that as soon as possible. And you will hear today, I'm sure, from other applications, why do we need more housing development when it was all planned that all housing need in Gillingham would be delivered through the Gillingham Southern Extension? Well, that was never quite true, and that was never what was meant. There was always going to be some infill or whatever. A problem that has now developed whilst we're waiting for the Southern Extension to get underway is that speculative development is coming in through the back door. Perhaps too much reliance is put on the early delivery of the extension in those olden days of the North Dorset Local Plan when we did that plan together. This outline application before you today is the final part of the jigsaw for the Gillingham Southern Extension and the second half of the Loddon Lakes development, the principle of which was agreed through the Strategic Local Plan allocation and supported by the adopted Gillingham Neighbourhood Plan. There's no statutory body opposing any of this. This is this funny thing. There was such controversy this morning, the public getting right behind something they didn't want. Well, this is the public getting behind something they do want. They planned it. It was master planning that they did. Now, as you've read, 3 letters of representation were received. 1 letter of support from a local resident stating the following: cannot wait for more details of those houses. As a family with 2 children at high school in town, the location is perfect, and hopefully some houses will be affordable for my husband and I, both teachers, to be able to get on the housing ladder. The remaining 2 letters were from the adjacent Gillingham and District Anglers Association, where several objections were raised. But I am pleased to say that following discussions with Taylor Wimpey, the Anglers Association wrote to the council confirming the withdrawal of the earlier objections. So please, people do lose faith in the planning system, and that's a shame with parishes and towns. But the planning for this Southern Extension was done by the people of Gillingham. Let's show them we can deliver what they asked for. So committee, as there are no material considerations which would warrant refusal of this application, I urge you to support the officer's recommendation and approve the application. Let's get on with it, please.
Thank you very much, Councillor Walsh. We now have a statement on behalf of the agent, which Nicola Holdsworth is going to read for us. Nicola, and you're ready?
Hello.
Hello, thank you.
Okay. Simon Fife, Savills Planning Agent. Good morning, Chairman, Councillors, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for allowing Savills as agent to provide a written statement on this planning application on behalf of Taylor Wimpey, the applicant. The outline planning application is for up to 115 dwellings with access from New Road and Loddon Lakes, Phase 1, which is being developed by the applicant. It establishes the broad parameters of development and details the access arrangements. The application is before you today with a recommendation of approval from the Council's Planning Officer. The Council has confirmed shortfall in housing land supply and benefits of delivering this allocated site are therefore significant. The proposals would also deliver a number of major benefits for the local community, including 115 new homes to meet local needs, 25% affordable housing, of which 70% affordable rent, benefits to the local economy, including new jobs and expenditure in the town centre, financial contributions towards education, community, healthcare and recycling facilities, financial contributions towards public and active transport facilities and services and highway infrastructure, public open space and sustainable drainage and habitat creation and landscaping in the Loddon Valley. Pre-application consultation revealed a significant level of support for the master plan, including open space and landscaping proposals. This was echoed by strong support from the Town Council. Following submission of the application, no objections are raised by local residents or the Town Council. One letter of support was submitted. Taylor Wimpey also engaged with the Gillingham and District Angling Association, which resolved matters raised by the association. Further technical work with regard to surface water drainage, archaeology and access ensured that the statutory consultees confirmed no objections to the proposals. Savills also provided confirmation that the outline proposals are entirely consistent with planning policy and the broad spatial and urban design requirements of the master plan framework. Detailed matters raised by the Council's landscape officer will be addressed at the reserved matters stage. Savills has confirmed to the planning officer that the draft planning conditions are appropriate and the heads of terms for the Section 106 agreement have been agreed. The grant of planning permission would cement Taylor Wimpey's commitment to the early delivery of Phase 2, aligned with the Council's commitment to delivering the principal street. This is an exciting opportunity to deliver much needed new homes in Gillingham in a sustainable manner. We therefore hope you can support your officer's recommendation and resolve to grant the planning permission. That's it.
Thank you very much, Nicola.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Members, do we have any questions on this application? We are familiar with this site and familiar with this, as David calls it, this jigsaw. Any questions? Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Chair. Just two questions for Steve Savage. The first one, I presume if I asked the same question as I did for the first application about cyclists, you would give me the same answer. The second question is just about the safety and line of sight of the proposed junction. Just want to know that you're happy that that line of sight is safe for 12 months of the year, because the pictures show nicely cut hedges where, of course, when I went past on Sunday, they are significantly taller now, and I would just like some reassurance on that, please.
Thank you, Steve. So that's cyclists and hedges, please. Thank you.
Well, the answer is yes, Councillor Hall, to your first question, as you would anticipate. The second element with regards to visibility displays, we also asked the applicant to provide cross sections of the visibility display, particularly the one that goes to the southwest, and that has ensured that the sightline will be maintained at all times. And you'll see there's also a condition, a recommended condition on your on the report, which stipulates the need for them to maintain these visibility displays at all time. So hopefully that's satisfied your second part of your question, Councillor.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cook has a question, and then I shall go to the ward members. Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chairman. It's another question for Steve, actually. You mentioned speed limits earlier. Am I absolutely correct in thinking that this is still in the 60-mile-an-hour limit, and you feel that that is safe with the traffic coming down towards Gillingham, or is there any question about changing the speed limit to a 40, maybe where that line crosses at the southeast corner?
Through you, Chair. The speeds were ascertained from ATCs, automatic traffic counters, located 100 metres either side of the proposed junction position. The data there was then factored to provide us with wet weather speed, which indicated that they were 40-mile-an-hour approaches, and these are 85th percentile approach speeds. So it's the 15 down from the 100 vehicles, the top 100 speeds, as it were. So we're not looking at averages, we're looking at what we deem to be the appropriate speed. There'll always be the occasional person who decides to go above the speed limit. Yep. But the visibility displays you see there, they're actually based on DMRB, Design Manual for Roads and Bridges requirements, providing 2.4 by 120 metre sight lines. More normally, we would be looking for manual for streets requirements, which would be looking for 79-metre sight lines. So we've got a real degree of safety here, as far as we're concerned, between the DMRB and the MFS standard, which I felt was appropriate in this circumstance, because, as you quite rightly mentioned, people do accelerate when they go past the junction to Brickfields. They accelerate towards that bend. It is within the national speed limit, but obviously the bend itself acts as the speed control measure. So just to reiterate, we're totally confident that the visibilities that you see there are appropriate and safe for the proposed junction.
Lovely. Thank you, Chair.
That's very helpful. Councillor Apothecary.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm really delighted to see this come forward for our consideration today. And would echo Councillor Walsh's comments in their entirety. It's part of the master plan framework. The whole town, I think, probably without exception, has bought into this development. I really welcome it. Thank you very much. I'd like to propose that we recommend approval of it.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Rideout.
Thank you, Chairman. I echo what my fellow colleagues just said, Councillor Apothecary and Councillor Walsh. This is exciting for Gillingham and it's coming forward. Hooray. And I'm particularly excited about the contribution to transport and the bus service contribution. Very welcome for our town. And I'm happy to second the proposal.
That's lovely. Thank you very much indeed. I'm seeing nothing else, and I would just like to add my comments to what's exciting here. I'm particularly pleased to see in this one, and indeed the previous one, that we're negotiating a shorter time frame for some of these developments. I think that's a very positive development, and I would thank officers for taking that on board. We've had a proposer and a seconder to support this application as it is before us. I have seen no further questions, so I will now proceed directly to our minded to vote. Ladies and gentlemen, when I call your name, will you tell me whether you're for or against? Councillor Cook.
For.
Councillor Fry.
For.
Councillor Hall.
For.
Councillor Heatley.
For.
Councillor Carol Jones.
For.
Councillor Stella Jones.
For.
Councillor Mary Penfold.
For.
Councillor Val Apothecary.
For.
And Councillor Belinda Rideout.
For.
Good, that's a unanimous minded to recommendation. I will now go to our head of planning to give us his decision. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I can confirm I have heard the debate and that this application will be determined in line with the committee's minded to decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Members, we have just about enough time to bring forward agenda item 6 and do that before lunch. Unless anybody's going to wildly object, I think that would give us a little more time in the afternoon. So agenda item 6 then is to have a brief presentation from Planning Officer Hannah Smith to note appeals decisions that have been reported to us. Hannah,
thank you, Chair.
If ready on the appeals decisions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes, we've got 3 appeals on the reports list this month to just highlight to members of the committee. The first appeal was a written reps appeal in Stallbridge. It was actually the second time it was considered by the planning inspectorate and it was dismissed both times. This was a particularly good case because the first inspector didn't find quite so severe harm in terms of the heritage impacts of the scheme, but this second inspector dismissed the appeal, which was for 8 fewer dwellings than the previous scheme, citing that there would be significant harm to the to Stallbridge conservation area. It would impact adversely on the character and appearance of the area, and especially in terms of landscape impact, the inspector noted that it would be a valued landscape So it's a particularly good inspector decision on this one, which upheld all the reasons that were put forward by the council in defending the appeal. I think it's worth noting that in this appeal there was obviously the conflict outside of the settlement boundary, but there was also robust other reasons to consider when weighing up the harm. The inspector in this case didn't have to consider the tilted balance and the presumption, because the inspector found harm to the conservation area. So in those instances, the tilted balance doesn't apply because the public benefits of the scheme weren't considered to outweigh the benefits of the proposal, of the harm to the conservation area. Is there any questions on that one at all?
Any questions on that? No, I'm seeing none coming through. That's
Brilliant.
very helpful. A good result though, that one, Hannah. Very good result for our smaller settlements all across North Dorset. Yes, carry on.
So the second appeal is for a certificate type application. So this is the kind of application doesn't normally come before the committee. But it's an interesting one because it grappled with what's a caravan and what's a building, which is always interesting in terms of lawfulness and certificate applications. It's really just a note at the moment. It was a good conclusion because the inspector found that it was well founded, the reason to refuse, but we're still seeking some legal input into the full decision because part of it does have implications for the site-wide enforcement notice that was served, but it's just really to note at this point in time, unless there's any particular questions about it.
No, it's helpful. Any questions on that one, ladies and gentlemen?
Excuse me, Chairman, could we ask where this is?
Oh, sorry, apologies. It's in Tinkleton, which is just outside of our committee area, so it doesn't apply. It's land at Cliff Copse, Tinkleton, which is just outside of our committee area. But it's in a wooded area where there's forestry type activity and a scheduled nature monument, and the appellant applied to site a caravan in this area. The inspector found that it wasn't a twin caravan, a twin unit caravan, which is a type of caravan that you bolt together, but did go on to conclude that part of the building that's currently still on the site was a caravan, but that the certificate could not succeed because there's an enforcement notice that applies to the whole site. So it's a little bit complicated in terms of lawful uses and development. And sorry, Councillor Fry.
The location is just outside Dorset, very near Kingston Moor for those who are looking for it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. And the next one?
The last one was in the former West Dorset area. It's a good decision because the inspector in this case found in favour of our spatial distribution in the West Dorset and Weymouth local plan. So it's for change of use to an agricultural building in Buntish, which was in an isolated location. The inspector found that there was no footpath, there was no highway connectivity. It wouldn't comply with our policies that tried to direct development to sustainable locations, and it was contrary to INT1 and SAS3 of the West Dorset and Weymouth local plan. And it goes on to sort of demonstrate the fact that when we are sort of looking to refuse applications because of their sustainability impacts, we really need to sort of justify that in terms of is there a footpath, provisions of footpaths, is it lit, how far away these are, would it be dangerous for people to walk, and those kind of things, which really helps to justify the environmental harm of putting development contrary to our spatial strategy. So it's just to note in relation to changes of uses to dwelling houses, which is slightly different to when we consider sort of permitted development type uses, which don't apply our full sort of range of policies. But it just goes to show that we can still uphold our spatial strategy when we have to apply our planning policies.
Yeah, good. That's very helpful. Any questions on that one? No, I think members, it's worth our while having a good look at these appeal reports when we see them periodically, because they help to inform us when we want to make decisions of the sort of grounds that inspectors uphold. And it is sometimes surprising when we read the appeal decisions that the inspectors will uphold some nuanced aspect of the report. And the thing that we would have thought was the most obvious and the strongest, they don't uphold. So two things we learn from seeing these reports. First of all, how to make a good case, but we also learn that it can be a little bit chancy when you go before an inspector always. Okay, thank you very much. If there are no further questions, we will now adjourn until 2 o'clock, and we will reconvene them and continue our meeting. Try and get out into the sunshine for a few minutes over the lunch break, and I will see you all again at 2 o'clock. Thank you very much indeed.